Okay, everyone. This is the third and what will be the final web lecture for the psychiatric rehab process. In class on Thursday, where we'll do the empowerment lecture. This is probably, in terms of your final exam, the most important of the lectures, these web lectures, because it talks about the planning and the intervention phase. So pay close attention to the concepts in this section, please. Again, I'm doing this from home. I apologize if there's any background noise of my son, my dogs, stuff like that. I'll try to pause it as needed. Also, I will pause as needed to help the computer process the slideshow, because it takes a fair amount of processing speed and power to make it from the actual recording to having it turn into the video. So we've already covered the psych rehab readiness, the readiness assessment, and the development. Then after that we have the diagnosis, which we covered, the overall rehab goal, which of course is very important and should be driving the rest of our planning and intervention, the functional assessment, and the resource assessment. So probably the shortest portion in terms of lecture slides is this planning phase. This is a very simple step compared to all the other steps for the psych rehab process. Planning involves selecting priority objectives, selecting interventions, and assigning responsibilities. It'll work better if I actually set it as a slideshow. Hey, there we go. So planning, we're actually choosing specific rehabilitation interventions to improve high priority skills and resource deficits. It assigns who will do what and when during the intervention phase of rehabilitation. It's very important when it comes to psychiatric rehab. Somebody who's truly using this model in their clinic, there is the goals, the interventions, sorry, not the goals, the intervention approaches all have a timeline, some measurability, but who will do it and who will follow up, and who's in charge of that stage. So the three steps: identifying, selecting, and assisting. So identifying priority objectives, we're listing in order of importance those skills and resource deficits that must be eliminated in order for the consumer to be successful and satisfied in the consumer's environment of choice. Remember, successful is determined by the environment, satisfaction by the client. Excuse me, sorry. Identifying priority objectives, we should look at things like urgency, the environment's perspective on how essential or necessary the skill is or resource is for success, the client's motivation, the consumer's perspective on how important the skill of resource, that doesn't sound right, skill for a resource is for satisfaction, the ease of achievement, how easy or difficult is it for them to gain, and the level of engagement, the level of support that is available to the consumer. So, take for example housing. We had used the example of like affordable rent and stuff like that. That's not actually going to be what's in the planning phase. The planning phase is going to be that the person needs to learn to package their own meds, need to be able to cook by themselves, identify safety issues, different stuff like that. So each one of those would be kind of looked at in terms of these four things: the urgency, the motivation, the ease of achievement, stuff like that. And you're going to look at which one's most important. And for housing, actually the medications is probably the least of the important ones. So you're not going to initially start with that type of objective because there's no urgency to it there, and there's little motivation. Whereas the learning to cook or some of their basic living skill areas are going to be much more important. So those are going to be the objectives that are more than likely going to be started with. The same can be done if the objective is to get a job and stuff like that. Maybe learning about how to get along in the job isn't as important or isn't as urgent as developing a resume, learning interview skills, stuff like that. So in terms of the interventions, remember in there's four general intervention types to address skill and resource deficits, and they are direct skill teaching, where they're unable to perform a critical skill; skills programming, where they're able to perform the critical skill but not at the needed frequency or circumstance; resource coordination, they have no access to a needed resource; and resource modification, access to the needed resource but not at the needed frequency or circumstance. So these are kind of the only skill interventions, everything that might be put on a treatment plan in a psych rehab place using the psych rehab stuff. These are the types of that should fall into one of these four categories, and each of these categories has a specific type of barrier that it can be used with, and we're going to talk about the barrier and the skill intervention. And this is the portion that's very, very important for your final exam. There's many examples of it on the final exam. Assigning responsibilities. Say each objective is going to have whether it's something the practitioner has to do, the consumer, the other supports. We describe the responsibility, timeline, and represent this information in a chart format. Alright, so the next slide here, I actually just took the first kind of break for the process. So that is actually the entire planning section, just those first few slides. The important things to know about the planning section is that we're selecting the priority objectives based on need, urgency, that type of stuff, and then we select our interventions that are appropriate, and we assign responsibilities that are dated, have a timeline, stuff like that. Intervention phase. The purpose of rehabilitation interventions is to improve the client's use of skills and supports. There's four major interventions that are used to focus on skill development and resource development. So each one of the our objectives is going to have an intervention type, one of those four intervention types. They're all related to a specific reason why they can't achieve that skill. Excuse me there. I got a stuffy nose all of a sudden. 4 intervention types. As I say, we talked about this a little bit. Ready? Skills teaching, skills programming or coaching, resource coordination, resource management. Direct skill teaching. This is used when the functional assessment indicates that the client does not perform a critical skill at all. Okay. Leads the client through a systematic series of instructional activities until the client demonstrates competence use of the skill. So this is going to be used when the person has not when a person has spontaneous use of the skill or prompted use. This is going to be used when there's the performance use. Skills programming uses a step-by-step procedure to prepare the client to use existing skill as needed. So we're increasing the frequency of how it's used, increasing the effectiveness of it, making sure it's done right, stuff like that. It helps the client overcome a barrier in using the existing skill and to use the skill as frequency as needed in the environment of their choice. So teaching plus programming equals mastery. Direct skill teaching and skills programming are designed to complement each other. You're going to do the one often and then move into the other one. After skill is acquired through direct skills teaching, skills programming will coach the client in applying, mastering, and generalizing the skill in the environment. So that's kind of moving them from the performance use to prompted use to the spontaneous use. Really, I mean, mastery, you can use the word mastery here as spontaneous use. Resource interventions, we have resource coordination, where we're assisting the consumer in finding, selecting, and accessing resources in their environment of choice. Often this is a large part of therapy in general. And resource modification might be an adapting existing resource to fit their need of the consumer in their current environment. This is where we might be working with the housing staff and trying to create a better schedule for them so that they feel more in control of when they have to meet the housing staff and stuff like that. Maybe developing a ADL chart that the staff reviews every so often with them. A lot of different things could be resource modification. Case management services. Resource coordination and modification are the most common interventions in classic case management practices and newer models of case management. Some of the models: intensive case management, supportive case management, and health homes, which was that lecture where Amy and Mark and Julie came in and talked about what health homes is about. Direct skill teaching. Definition. This should really be put together with the other stuff. This is really repetitive. Leading the consumer through a systematic series of instructional activities, resulting in the consumer's competent use of new behavior. Condition for use: when the consumer cannot perform a skill needed for success and satisfaction within the environment specified in the ORG. So the steps: we're going to be outlining the content, writing a brief description of the critical knowledge that the client needs to perform. So the definition, the benefit, the steps, the conditions. And we're going to be planning a lesson, designing a series of instructional activities that teach the consumer how to perform the skill. Important points the instructor will present, the process and product examples, practice opportunities, and critique. So outlining the content, this is kind of an example of how it might be organized. You know, the meaning of the skill, you know, what does it mean to need to balance budget, you know, or pay their bills. The benefit of the skill and the critical steps that they need to do to perform it and the condition.
Okay.
Hold on. Alright, planning the lesson. This is one of those methods that was listed in the group thing and listed in the one other reading. For direct skills teaching, we often talk about the ROPES approach, which stands for review of the skill, overview of what's going to be new, review what you did in the past, or maybe review the skill, an overview of what you're going to do today, presentation, an exercise, and then kind of a summary follow-up. Kind of shows like a tell, show, do critique stuff in terms of your exercise is also important. Skills programming use. Again, it's a little repetitive, but it's a step-by-step procedure to prepare the client for the use of the skill. It eliminates the obstacles to the client's use of the skill as needed, and the condition is when the client is unable to perform the skill at the needed frequency or circumstance. So the steps in it, we kind of have to, of course, identify the barriers. What are the reasons that the person is not using the skill at the needed frequency? So this might be just identifying that they're not taking notice or identifying the need for the skill. Might be learning, might be that they need to grow in their understanding of when the skill should be used. And then determining a method for overcoming, developing a program which is a determining method for overcoming the barrier. And we involve identifying solutions and determining the sequence, the steps to overcome the barriers, and supporting the client actions. So you might identify the barrier as memory, and that they're not able to remember things as they properly should in terms of taking their medicine. And in terms of your method, it might involve doing some actually memory work to improve the memory, but probably a lot of extra helpers such as marking things on a calendar, setting up a specific board in the house of where the person should look every day for what the next stuff they should do, and then kind of we'd support the action by continuing to ask about it, to continuing to review it as we went forward to see how effective they were. And that's the written plan. It includes timelines, reinforcements, and methods for monitoring progress.
Where's my booklet?
Okay. So there's 4 different types of barriers that is the way that the psych rehab process kind of brings everything together, and any type of barrier can fall, everything falls into one of these types of barriers. So the first barrier is the lack of confidence. Basically the person does not feel capable of using the skill, and some of the clues might be that they've never tried to use the skill in a specific circumstance. They give many reasons for not trying it, forgets to use the skill, cannot explain the problems in using the skill, expressing feelings of defeat, fear, or being overwhelmed. This is the type of person that can list to you in talking one-to-one maybe the steps to balance a checkbook and stuff, but they don't actually use those steps and talk about them. They have the knowledge, but they just don't have the confidence to actually apply it in the situations when it should be applied. The second type of barrier, is the lack of knowledge. Basically, they don't have the knowledge needed required to use the skill. The client will be say stuff like, "I don't know what that's about. I don't know how to do that." This often sometimes is the case with a lot of consumers as they're trying to move to be more independent, because the mental health system for a long time has kind of made them dependent, made them a sense of learned helplessness. So even though the person might be 30 years old, if they've been in the mental health system since they're 18, they've never learned how to pay their bills. They don't have the knowledge of how it ends up being done in terms of paying their bills, because maybe they've lived in a group home or a treatment apartment where the apartment itself actually took care of the finances, and they only had a weekly or bi-weekly allowance that they're given, and probably that they don't spend right either. Okay, the next type of barrier is the lack of forethought. Basically, they do not beforehand make arrangements for things that are required to use the skill as needed. Think of the person that doesn't problem solve right, or makes a plan but they make it, excuse the language, half-ass. They decide they're going to go on a vacation, but they didn't save the money to go on the vacation properly, or they saved money and bought the ticket but didn't think about saving money for everything else. Some cues as a client identifies a lack of time or unresolved issues as a source of a problem. The last type is lack of resources. Basically, they don't have the people, places, or things that are required to use the skill as needed. So this is, they don't have enough support. They don't have the car to get to work, or there's not a bus nearby them, so they always end up late to work because it takes so long to get somewhere. Those type of things. Q, not having necessary tools or supplies to perform the skill. So the type of solutions, there's 4 different types of solutions. Rehearsal. This is role play and simultaneous. Role play and simulations of skill performance outside of the environment where the skill is expected to be used. Usually the practitioner sets up circumstances in which the client is asked to act out the skill, and both the practitioner and the client critique the client's performance. So just like you guys were going to initially do the group treatment, and we were going to tape it, it was going to be taped so that I could critique plus you could critique in that case. That would be a type of rehearsal, and they would do that multiple times in order to learn the skills. Lack of planning. Not lack of planning. Planning. Identifying and establishing the steps that will be enacted prior to the circumstance of skill performance. These are the pre-steps that are integrated into the skill that is being programmed. So what are the things they need to do? This could be what are the things that a person needs to do to recognize they're getting angry, and what are the learning the coping skills. Pre-steps will prepare the client to engage in the skill when needed. Successive approximation. This is where we're establishing smaller goals with timelines that will ultimately lead to the achievement of skills goal. So this is kind of, think of it as kind of grading in a way. Sometimes the circumstance or frequency is graded down. Sometimes shaping is used, breaking down the behavioral steps of the skill. Then the final one's resource acquisition. Of course, this is helping coordinate or modify. This is that case management portion. It may involve purchasing, making negotiations for people or objects. And research. Now that's actually 5. I think I said 4. Solutions, but there's actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's 6. Sorry. Gathering needed information regarding the skill, resources or additional benefits, reasons for client resistance, and other identified concerns. May involve reading, interviewing others, telephoning, observing, visiting places, getting information, different stuff like that. So this is kind of the chart. This is the barrier over here and the types of solutions that should be planned over here. Be able to kind of get an example of a specific person and be able to infer the type of barrier and the type of solution that should be used. So it might, the question on the exam might say something like, XYZ consumer is thinking about moving to independent housing as part of his overall rehab goal, and he is unsure what supports are given at some of the different locations, what type of solution would be best to fit this barrier. Or it might say what is the barrier type and the type of solution. So of course that would be research. I can't think of any other examples right now at 9 o'clock in the morning. So actually what I'm going to do here is cheat and go to kind of give you a little sneak preview of part of your final exam because it has some examples on it. Where's the section here? So this is actually a combination of okay. The best way to overcome a lack of knowledge barrier to skill performance is the appropriate intervention with a client who is able to perform a critical skill but not in the intended circumstance. This would be skills programming. This one here would be research. So you see there's a fair number of questions here. So hopefully now you should get those questions right no matter what on the final exam. Alright, and oops, and that is the last slide for the psych rehab process. So for the final exam, make sure you know the steps, how to write an overall rehab goal, what an overall rehab goal would look like, some of the important aspects of the readiness assessment, the ideas of what you would take into account in terms of planning, and make sure you know a lot from this lecture in terms of the barrier types and the type of solutions, and that's about it I don't think I can give you any more. Know the type of skill uses also, whether it's spontaneous, prompted, performance use. Okay. So this is the end of the online things. I'll see you in class on Thursday, and we will be doing the empowerment lecture.